You have to know Satan is not omniscient, nor is he all powerful. So when I explain a couple things to you here, I think it's really important that you realize he does have limitations. And I am very, very concerned about the Great Deception. I've talked about it probably a half dozen times in the last 18 months. But we're looking at this historically, and then we're going to blend it into the present. We're going to take a look at what I think is really the Great Deception. And I'm going to analyze it further and biblically in a different broadcast. But I want to get your attention with this because there's some dates that coincide that bother me. And we're going to talk about those dates right here on the Common Sense Show. My name is Dave Hodges. We're the show freeing America one enslaved mind and soul at a time, defending God, family, country. And we have a place, a special place in our heart for the oppressed. We're brought to you by 7702. And you go, what's that? It's your ticket to really good wealth. It used to be that the rich and famous used IRS code 7702 to generate income by combining certain kinds of financial instruments, and they didn't pay tax on it. And it's legal. And they kept that knowledge close to the vest. And at one time, it was even illegal to talk about it in a forum like this. Now it's not. Joe Lombardi and others have cracked the code, and he's helping people make money beyond their wildest dreams. And some of the people who have gone to Joe, listened to what he did and said, and then followed through. And by the way, it takes 30 to 60 days, can even take longer because they dot every I, cross every T. They got to stay in compliance with federal law. But we have a couple of people from our audience who took part in this, loved it, and then they were taken on as agents. Now you have to go through some training to do that, and you have to pass a test. But I've met these people, very impressive people, and it looks like this is working for a lot of people. Why don't you take a look at it? It works. I'm telling you, this is the best kept secret out there. Go to dhawk.com, leave your contact information, and someone from Iron Hawk Financial will be in touch. That's dhawk.com. Well, let's take a look at disclosure. And I think that we really need to take a look at the year 1945. I have mixed feelings on this, and I'm not going to judge. I'm just going to state the historical event. The United States dropped two atomic bombs on Japan, which effectively ended World War II. And the way this story gets told is, well, the demons in the Ethereum, wherever they are, when they're not here on Earth, they reacted like, whoa, what was that? Amazing power. And then what's really interesting is less than a year and a half later, in 1947, there were a bunch of events that happened. This is really a milestone year. In 1947, you had the Roswell crash. Now, you could look at it a number of ways. It wasn't a weather balloon, it was something that crashed with bodies. Could they be dummies? I don't know. Could they be real aliens? I don't think so because I don't believe in that, but yeah, it's possible. Could they have been demonic entities and this is how they travel? Part of the Nephilim, Genesis 6, verse 4, possibly. But the US government uncovered stuff and began to reverse engineer technology because we had quantum leaps involved in this. And a guy named Colonel Corso was right at the beginning of this. You should read his book, the late Colonel Corso. Fantastic book. But that's not the only event. Subsequently, the Air Force was devised from the U.S. Army Air Corps. It broke away. Air Force used to be under the Army. And then they broke away and then they became the U.S. Air Force, tightly controlled by the CIA, which, by the way, in 1947, the OSS converted to the CIA. And if that's not enough, then we had the no such agency. Oh, that would be the NSA, National Security Agency. It was illegal to even talk about it. It was so top secret that if you would have been caught, let's say, transferring a form with NSA on the letterhead, you would have done a lengthy prison sentence. It was that sensitive. My dad was in Intel. He didn't even know about the NSA for years. So you had the CIA, the NSA, you had Roswell. Pretty amazing stuff, isn't it? Was this a reaction to the nuclear explosion, and does the Great Deception have its roots right here? Possibly, because 1947, not only the Roswell crash, but we had started to have sightings out of seemingly nowhere. And there are a lot of people who now, this is now a debate in eschatology, but the debate has changed from speculation to a lot of mainstream pastors are buying into this. How do I know? Because I speak at conferences like Hear the Watchman, and you should look that up, hearthewatchman.com. They have a conference coming up in August, and you really want to attend it. Anyway, what I'm getting to here is 47 was the landmark year. There was also an upsurge at this time as people report in demonic activity, poltergeists and all this other stuff. And then the alien abduction phenomena. And for a long time, I thought this is the craziest stuff I've ever heard of. These people are all psychotic, and that's how they were painted in the media, but they weren't. We know that these things happen. Now, I'm not saying there wasn't fraudsters, there was, but and I'm not saying there's not mentally ill people that make up stuff. There are. But this happened too often. You know, the interesting case too about Betty and Barney Hill, which came later. Um, Betty said that when she was on this craft, not ours, that she was shown a constellation and she remembered some of the key parts. Later, when she was debriefed, those were recorded, became part of the record. And it wasn't until about 12, 13 years later that constellation and its configuration was discovered. Um, a lot of people say, "Oh, see, Dave, that's proof it's aliens." No, no, not necessarily. Let me go to a science fiction movie that came out in 1950. It's called The Day the Earth Stood Still. Great actor, Michael Rennie. Well, he did a wonderful job in this movie, and I've seen this movie probably 3 or 4 times over the years. And it was about an alien that came to Earth. He had an all-powerful robot, AI, by the way. Isn't that interesting? You're talking early 50s, Dave? Yeah. AI robot? Yes. Unbelievable. This vertical craft landed on the White House Mall, instantly surrounded by soldiers and tanks, and we know something big is happening. And let me cut to the end of the story. Michael Rennie, the alien, addressed world leaders, and he said, "What you do on your planet is your business. But the moment you take your warlike ways with the weapons you're developing out there, it becomes our business. And this robot, we have a race of them that patrol the galaxy and they instantly destroy any aggressor. And if you don't change your ways, your planet will turn into a burned out cinder." Now, I'm going to kind of alter this a little bit and just say this got us to really consider our place in the universe. This was a hit movie, and it still airs from time to time, and it's almost timeless in its message. And what I really found interesting here was not so much was this about an alien coming here to warn us, was it part of building the Great Deception? A lot of people believe, and I've been to Christian presentations on this, that the Great Deception will be Genesis 6, verse 4. The Nephilim, the fallen angels, they bred with earth women. And then God said, this is just terrible, and we got to wipe it all out with the flood. But in Genesis, it says, and they were there afterward. Well, who? The fallen angels. They survived the flood. At least in some form, they survived the flood. You could debate whether it was physical or spiritual, ethereal. I'm not sure, but the Bible's pretty clear on that point. And when we take a look at this, a lot of people feel that the deception will be here's a make-believe alien threat, and there was even a CIA plot uncovered in the 80s called Project Bluebeam, which was using high-tech AI threats. You think AI is new? And imitate an alien invasion, and that would unify the planet under a single ruler, hence the final days, and you've got the Antichrist, the false prophet. Okay, so you get the idea. So this is where some people's minds go on this. To me, I'm not sure, but I'll tell you what's interesting, and I think what would have caught if you believe that the demons were attracted by nuclear explosion. What also happened in 1947? Let's not forget our Old Testament. The center of the Old Testament is the nation of Israel, both fallen and regenerated and so forth, and Moses helping and Israel. We have Baal and all of these false gods that the decadent part of Israel worshiped. And then we'd have people come along and correct that and try to return the Israelis back to worshiping the real and true God. And so Israel being regenerated in 1947 with the support of the UK and the US and some European banking money, would that have caught the attention of Satan and his demons? Yeah, I think it would have been a very big deal. And are all of these forces coalescing for the final deception? In fact, I could write one heck of a short story, probably sell it to network television, and maybe get a 30-minute pilot because I think this is fascinating stuff. And the more I look at this, the more I see biblical tie-ins. And I'm not going to cover all those here in this. I'm raising the questions. And then I asked a pastor that I interviewed today, Shay, on churches in 71 countries, plans to build 300 churches in California, try to retake California. I'm going to be talking about that later. But Shay actually, I asked him a direct question. He actually answered me in the negative. I said, Shay, there's a debate I hear. I said, I hear some pastors talk and there's a pre-tribulation rapture. And then I hear others saying, they go, no, no, that's wrong. That's mistaken. I said, what do you say? And he just methodically walked through it and he ended up on the negative side. He says, no, I don't believe that's true. He said at one time, though, he did consider it to be true. But then as he got further into the scripture, he said it's not true. So we're not going to escape this. And I'll just say this, though. If there was a pre-tribulation rapture, okay, and I tend to go with Shay on, I don't think it's true, but if it's true, how would that be handled by the fallen angels who might be amongst us in some way? We know angels can take human form. What would they say? And I was thinking about this and I thought, well, they might say it was alien abduction and we got to get ready for the war. And there's your great deception. This is really interesting stuff to consider. I had a really lengthy discussion when I discussed this at a Christian conference I was at a couple of years ago, and I talked about this. And I said, look, this is really hard to pin down, but the Bible is very clear about great deception. And there are as many of opinions as there are people looking at this. But I said, some people think it's going to be a fake alien invasion like Project Bluebeam. And I said, I don't think that's the only possibility here, but I think it's one that needs to be looked at. And Paul Begley told me, Pastor Paul said, Dave, this is really the hot topic in eschatology right now. And there are some hardliners that will say, oh, no, 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 it doesn't say it directly in the Bible. It's not true. And they might be right. But I think it's something that we should be considered. And what I'm telling you this for is we're being teased with disclosure. We went decades. If you say you saw a UFO, you either saw the planet Mars, swamp gas, or you have schizophrenia. Wasn't that how it was? Only crazy people. And, I actually talked to people, a relative, an in-law, that I saw one and described it in detail to me. I said, did you ever report it? No, I don't want to be taken away. That was the answer. And that's how a lot of people felt. How does all this fit together? Tell me what you think. And like I said, I'm going to really dive into scripture here and try to make sense of this. And I may come back and say, this whole thing is absolutely crazy. There's no justification to it. But there's a lot of pastors that looked at this that would say that I would be wrong to make that conclusion. Tell me what you think. I think we live in very interesting times. The one thing I want to tell you about, though, is this is not to induce fear because the Lord's really clear. Fear is from the devil. Fear not. You put your trust in the Lord and you'll be okay. I really do believe that. And it's not that you won't be tested, but fear not. Trust in the Lord. By the way, there's research now on prayer. And when prayer starts out acknowledging the almighty power of God, the autonomic nervous system calms down completely. Fight or flight mechanism in the brain, largely in the hypothalamus, goes inert. Pretty interesting stuff. I'm actually going to talk about that research tomorrow in some detail. It's going to be a pretty lengthy presentation. We've seen some research on people that pray, and then there's been research on prayers that end up resulting in unlikely miracles. And do they have commonalities in the methodology of praying? And really what you come up with, and I'll disclose this tomorrow, it's pretty much the way I was taught how to pray. I looked at this, I find this completely believable because this is how I was taught how to pray when I was a kid. But a lot of times we just get away with it. God, please do this, like he's some vending machine in the sky. We're going to get into that too, but we live in really, really tough times. And we're looking at things that I think represent a huge change in our society, our culture. And I don't want to enter into that without putting on the armor of God. And that's what I encourage you to do. I'm Dave Hodges. God bless all of you, and we'll see you back here again next time.